days.
This is the finish of the race that
The
was
race
here.
itself.
The race itself. It's a moment frozen in time, and time is what this was all about.
And this man with a pipe in his mouth, a typically English stance, he was the chief timekeeper.
This was a race against time, expressed in a single number, the number 4. 50 years ago this week, at a quiet little track meet at Oxford University, a medical student named Roger Bannister and his 2 training buddies set out on more than a foot race. They set out on a mission to do what no man had done before, to break the 4-minute mile.
The real problem of the day itself was the weather. And I thought that the chances were about 50-50. And I thought that if the chances are 50-50, I ought to take them.
Because you felt under
Could
pressure.
I might get another chance.
In fact, Bannister's real competitors were not on the track at Oxford that day. They were on the other side of the world.
Santee is making another try at a 4-minute clocking.
In Kansas, an American runner, Wes Santee, the Kansas Cowboy, the Ashland Antelope, had been getting closer and closer to the 4-minute mile and thought he was the natural choice to break it.
Well, I thought I would. And I thought that because I think, with all due respect to the other athletes, I had by far the best training system, the best coach.
And in Australia, another runner, John Landy, had seemed to come out of nowhere, running the mile in just 4 minutes, 2 seconds.
If Bannister ran at a time, I would hear about it, so I was well aware of what they were doing. After I'd run that race at 4:2.1, Roger Bannister came up and ran 4:2. Santee ran, I think, 4:2.4, and then the battle was on.
And it was a battle being followed around the world as well. The mile wasn't just a race, it was an idea.
It was perfect symmetry. I mean, 4 laps of the track in 4 minutes. It was perfect.
Neal Bascomb has written a book about that pursuit of perfection called The Perfect Mile.
Runners, decade after decade, were coming closer and closer and then stopped within basically a second and a half. And we're getting no further, no matter how hard they tried.
The barrier that Bannister and the others were trying to get through was a physiological barrier and a psychological one, to be sure, but it had a mythological quality as well. There were many around at the time who thought a 4-minute mile was simply a physical impossibility, and that anyone who managed to run one would die trying. And that fear certainly added to the suspense of the day, even if the runners didn't believe it.
I didn't. I mean, it wasn't just that I was a medical student. It defied logic that a person could run a mile in 4 minutes, 2 seconds and not be able to run under 4 minutes. Under best conditions, somebody must be able to do it.
Each of the 3 runners had taken a different approach to the challenge. Wes Santee, the star of the University of Kansas track team, had run race after race, but never against good enough competition.
So very seldom do we have a chance to bring the 2 or 3 other runners who might help push me to an under 4-minute time to come to get together. It's too bad we didn't have a better competition.
And John Landy, down there in Australia, trained perhaps hardest of all.
I got extraordinarily able at running laps at certain speed and good at running 4 minutes, 2 seconds, but not much better.
Bannister, the medical student who was doing full shifts at the hospital every day, had the most restricted training schedule of them all, running just 35 minutes a day.
Yes, but very hard. I mean, after all, the race is only 4 minutes. So what good running 10 miles is?
Bannister, as he approached the finish, was an athletic ideal on legs, the pure gifted amateur. And at this point, would you have known that you were on track, that you had that nut cracked?
Well, I hoped I had, because the 3/4 was faster than I'd done in races before. But I couldn't really be sure that my legs weren't slowing without telling my brain they were doing so. That was the problem. I leapt rather than ran over those last few yards, and I knew that if I made it, the world would be a nice friendly place, and if I didn't do it, the world would be a bit unfriendly. It was simple as that.
Bannister may have leapt those last few yards, but then collapsed as he crossed the line, completely spent. The timekeeper's call was 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. Nobody heard much beyond the number 3.
The reaction in England is, the kingdom is saved. We're redeemed. Bannister became one of the most recognizable names and faces. He was in every newspaper across the world.
Well, I was disappointed, happy for him, but disappointed that I hadn't done it.
I was amazed. In some ways, it was a weight off my shoulders.
Landy may have lost the race to be the first to break 4 minutes, but 6 weeks later ran an even faster time, 3:58. And then in August 1954, at the British Empire Games in Vancouver, Bannister and Landy would decide who was really faster. Wes Santee, now in the U.S. Marine Corps, couldn't run and had to comment on the race for U.S. television.
I would have loved to have been in that race. There was no question how that race was going to go. If Landy had a chance of winning, he had to go out and set up the pace, which he did.
John Landy, who always ran from the front, led for 3 3/4 laps, pulling away from Bannister, getting almost out of reach.
He went faster than I expected. Unwisely, I allowed a gap to open up.
I could see his shadow and my shadow, and I began to inch ahead.
But Bannister slowly clawed his way back.
I likened it to pulling in this invisible thread and got up to his shoulders at the 3/4 mile.
And I thought, hopefully, that I'd shaken him off. And I turned to the left to see where he was.
That was the moment when I decided to overtake.
And as I turned back to look up the straight, he was going past. It was all over.
He lost a bit of time by turning, which in theory you're not supposed to do. It's never recommended to.
Bannister had timed his kick perfectly. Landy was done. Both men ran under 4 minutes in what is still rightly called the mile of the century. Wes Santee never broke the 4-minute mile. His fastest time was half a second short. He retired to Kansas, where he still lives and still runs. John Landy went into public service and politics and is now governor of the Australian state of Victoria. Roger Bannister became a renowned neurologist, an author, and was knighted for his service to medicine and sport. He may have lost a step or two over the years, but not much else. Did it occur to you that 50 years later you'd be telling these same stories and going over the same material?
Not in the least. I didn't imagine that.
Well, all I can say is that I'm absolutely overwhelmed and delighted. It was a great surprise to me to be able to do it today.
And I am surprised still.